The Millionaire CEO sealed the biggest deal of his career, only to open his hotel room door and find his ex standing there, with a child who had his eyes. The city glowed beneath the heavy dusk, its skyline glittering like a crown of glass and steel, and Andrew Hayes watched it from the tinted window of his limousine, a faint, tired smile curving his lips. He had just closed the most profitable deal of his life, a merger that would double his company's worth overnight, and everyone around him called him a genius. His partners toasted his brilliance, his investors called him unstoppable, but inside, he felt only the dull echo of victory. It wasn't happiness. It was something colder, emptier, as if every success he collected hollowed him out a little more. When the car stopped in front of the Grand Regency Hotel, the driver jumped out to open his door. Andrew stepped into the marble-lit lobby, where soft music played and the smell of expensive perfume hung in the air. Every surface reflected wealth, order, and power, everything he'd spent years chasing. He checked in, exchanging a few polite words with the receptionist, then took the elevator to his suite on the 25th floor. He had no plans for the evening, no one waiting for him, and that was how it had been for a long time. He told himself that solitude was the price of ambition, that distractions like love or family were for men who didn't dream big enough. When he unlocked the door to his suite, he expected silence and the familiar emptiness that always greeted him after a long day of work. But as the door swung open, he froze. The soft murmur of a child's voice reached his ears, followed by the quiet laugh of a woman, a sound that struck something deep inside him. For a second, he thought he was imagining it, the fatigue playing tricks on his mind. Then he saw her. Sitting on the couch, a woman in a pale blouse was holding a little girl on her lap, reading to her softly from a picture book. The child's brown curls glowed in the light from the window, and the woman's blonde hair shimmered like gold. The air left his lungs. He would have known that voice anywhere, would have recognized that face even in a crowd of thousands. It was Lily. For a few long seconds, neither of them spoke. The color drained from her face as she realized who was standing in the doorway. The book slipped from her hand, landing soundlessly on the carpet. Andrew. She whispered, his name barely a breath. He couldn't move, couldn't think. Every memory he had buried came rushing back, the late nights in her tiny apartment when he'd thought he might actually be happy, the day she had told him she was pregnant, and the way he'd destroyed it all with a single sentence. "You planned this," he had accused her back then, the words sharp and cruel, fueled by fear more than anger. And then he'd walked away, leaving her standing in the rain with tears streaming down her face. Now, years later, she stood before him again, more fragile yet somehow stronger. Her eyes no longer looked at him with love but with a guarded calm that hurt even more. The little girl shifted in her arms, turning to see who was at the door. When Andrew saw her eyes, bright, crystal blue, mirrors of his own, his world tilted. The blood roared in his ears, and he had to grip the doorframe to steady himself. The resemblance was undeniable. His mind tried to find excuses, logic, anything that would let him deny what his heart already knew, but every rational thought dissolved in the quiet weight of that gaze. The girl blinked at him curiously, then smiled, a small, innocent smile that nearly broke him. Lily stood, holding the child close to her. "I didn't know this room was yours," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "It's a mistake. I'll leave." Andrew shook his head slowly, still unable to form words. He took a step forward, his chest tight, his throat dry. "Who is she?" he finally managed, though the answer was written in every line of the little girl's face. Lily hesitated, her fingers tightening protectively around the child. "Her name is Mia," she said softly. "She's 3. The number hit him like a blow. 3. The math was exact. He closed his eyes, trying to breathe. 3 years ago, he had been closing another deal, another night in another hotel room, convincing himself that he had made the right choice walking away from her. When he opened his eyes again, Lily was already moving toward the door, whispering to Mia to grab her things. The child clutched a small stuffed bear and looked at him one last time before following her mother out. The door closed behind them with a quiet click that felt louder than any sound he'd ever heard. Andrew stood alone in the room, staring at the empty couch where they had been. The deal he had just made that day, the one that had made him richer than ever, suddenly felt meaningless. He sank into a chair, running a hand through his hair, his pulse racing, his thoughts a storm. The silence pressed down on him, suffocating. He replayed every decision, every word, every moment that had led him here. He had built a fortress around himself, a life of numbers and contracts, but that fortress now felt like a prison. Somewhere out there, a little girl who carried his eyes and his blood was growing up without him. The image of Lily's face, the way she had looked at him with a mix of pain and pride, wouldn't leave him. He remembered the day she had told him she was pregnant, how she had cried when he refused to listen. He had convinced himself that she wanted something from him, money, status, control. But now, standing in that quiet room, he realized she hadn't wanted anything except him. That night, Andrew didn't sleep. The city lights outside his window flickered and blurred as he sat in the darkness, haunted by the echo of a child's laughter. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business, or power, or his next goal. He was thinking about the life he might have had, the one he had thrown away. He thought about Lily's trembling voice, about the way the little girl had looked at him, and he knew that no amount of success could erase the hollow ache spreading through his chest. Somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. He didn't know it yet, but the man who had walked into that hotel suite at the height of his power would never be the same again. The next morning, Andrew woke with the same heaviness pressing against his chest, the kind that even success couldn't smother. The morning light slipped through the tall curtains of the hotel suite, bathing the room in gold, yet everything inside him felt gray. His mind replayed the night before with painful clarity, the way Lily's voice had trembled, the flash of fear and defiance in her eyes, and the child's gaze, so calm and curious, like she'd been waiting her whole short life to meet him. He sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, running a hand over his face as though that could wipe away the images haunting him. For years, he'd told himself he'd done the right thing. He had believed that cutting ties had protected his future, his company, and even her. But now he knew that was a lie he had told himself because facing the truth had been harder. He had been a coward, not a strategist. His assistant called, reminding him that investors were waiting for a debrief over breakfast. He ignored the call. For once, numbers and profits didn't matter. He looked at the untouched champagne bottle from last night's celebration and felt sick. He left the hotel without telling anyone, his steps quick, purposeful. He didn't even know where he was going, only that he couldn't let it end like that. He had spent his life chasing deals that could vanish in a heartbeat, yet he had walked away from the only thing real. By the time he found himself outside the hotel's small garden cafe, he saw her again. Lily sat at a table under the morning sun, stirring coffee absent-mindedly while Mia munched on a muffin beside her, swinging her little legs in the air. They looked so peaceful together that, for a moment, he couldn't bring himself to move closer. He stood behind a hedge, hidden, just watching them. The child laughed at something, her voice clear and bright, and the sound hit him like sunlight breaking through a storm. He had missed 3 years of that laughter. He had missed her first steps, her first words, every milestone that mattered. He had no right to feel anything but guilt, and yet, standing there, all he could think about was how much he wanted to know them both. Lily noticed him before he could step forward. Her eyes flickered up, catching his, and the fragile serenity on her face vanished. She said something to Mia, then stood, ready to leave. Panic surged in him. He couldn't let her walk away again. He approached quickly, his voice lower, softer than he remembered it being. "Lily, please. Don't go." She hesitated, holding Mia's small hand, her expression unreadable. "What do you want, Andrew?" she asked quietly, and the exhaustion in her voice cut through him more than anger ever could. He didn't have an answer that didn't sound selfish, so he spoke the only truth he had. "I just want to talk." They sat back down, though the distance between them felt like miles. Mia looked between them, sensing the tension but too young to understand it. She reached for her juice box, her tiny brow furrowed in concentration. Andrew's gaze lingered on her before returning to Lily. "You could have told me," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "You wouldn't have listened," she replied, not unkindly, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had stopped hoping long ago. Her words hit him like a mirror reflecting everything he had been: arrogant, cold, unreachable. "I was scared," he admitted after a moment, surprising even himself. "You were always so sure of everything. But that day, I thought you wanted to trap me, ruin me. I didn't see that you were just trying to tell me we had something real." Lily's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I didn't want your money, Andrew. I wanted you to care." She exhaled slowly, looking down at the table. "When you left, I told myself I'd never let you back in, even if you showed up one day full of regrets. I built this life for her, for us. We're fine. We don't need anything from you." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, betraying the strength she was trying to hold on to. He wanted to tell her he didn't want to take anything from her, that he only wanted to give back what he had stolen, but the words tangled in his throat. Mia turned toward him suddenly, breaking the silence. "Are you Mommy's friend?" she asked, tilting her head. Her innocence disarmed him completely. He forced a small smile. "I'd like to be," he said softly. Lily looked away, her jaw tightening, as if holding back tears. The conversation ended soon after. She stood, paid for their breakfast, and gently guided Mia toward the exit. Before leaving, she turned to him and said quietly, "Please don't follow us. You made your choice once." He sat there long after they disappeared down the street, the half-empty cup of coffee cooling in front of him. Around him, the world moved on, businessmen hurried to meetings, couples chatted, children laughed, but everything inside him was still. He realized that no contract he had ever signed had carried as much weight as the one he had just broken all those years ago, the unspoken promise to love her, to stay, to protect what they had created. Now it was too late to rewrite the past, but maybe not too late to try and repair it. That night, back in his office, he opened his laptop and pulled up every record he could find on the charity projects his company funded. He discovered that one of them, a local art foundation for single mothers, listed Lily as a volunteer coordinator. He stared at her name for a long time before closing the computer. He wasn't sure what he would do yet, only that he couldn't return to life as it was before. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the city lights. They used to make him feel powerful, but now they only reminded him how small he really was compared to what he'd lost. Somewhere in that same city, his daughter was falling asleep in a tiny bed, her mother singing softly beside her. And for the first time in years, Andrew whispered to the empty office, "I don't want to be alone anymore." Days turned into weeks, but the image of Lily and Mia wouldn't leave Andrew's mind. He tried to bury himself in work again, filling his days with meetings, endless phone calls, and late nights at the office, but nothing distracted him for long. Every time he saw a child on the street, heard a laugh that echoed like Mia's, or caught the faint scent of Lily's favorite perfume in a passing crowd, he felt the same sharp twist in his chest. It wasn't just guilt anymore, it was longing. For the first time, the life he had built felt meaningless. The luxury, the status, the deals that had once thrilled him now seemed like chains tying him to a life he no longer wanted. His penthouse apartment, once a symbol of success, now felt unbearably empty. Every night, he'd stand by the window with a glass of scotch, looking down at the city lights, wondering if somewhere below, Lily was doing the same. One Friday evening, as the rain tapped softly against his office window, his assistant, Mark, knocked and entered. "Sir, are you going to the charity gala tomorrow night?" Andrew barely looked up. He had been planning to skip it, as he did most public events lately. Mark hesitated before adding, "It's for the Art Foundation. The one where Lily Bennett works." The name made Andrew freeze. He set down his pen slowly, his mind racing. "Are you sure?" he asked. Mark nodded. "Her name's on the guest list." For the rest of the evening, Andrew couldn't focus. He stared at the invitation on his desk long after everyone else had gone home. Maybe fate was giving him one more chance, and if it was, he couldn't ignore it again. The next night, the gala was held in the downtown conservatory, its glass walls glowing warmly against the dark sky. People in elegant clothes moved through the crowd with practiced smiles, the air filled with soft music and the sound of clinking glasses. Andrew arrived later than usual, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, but there was a restlessness in him that didn't fit the setting. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He scanned the room until he saw her. Lily stood near one of the art displays, speaking with a small group of guests. She wore a simple dark blue dress that brought out the brightness in her eyes, and her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling softly against her face. She looked more beautiful than he remembered, not because of glamour, but because of the quiet confidence she carried. She laughed at something one of the guests said, and for a moment, he saw the girl she had once been, the one who had made his world brighter without even trying. When their eyes met across the room, she froze, the smile fading from her lips. He could see the conflict flash across her face, surprise, anger, fear, maybe even something else she was trying to hide. She turned away, but he was already walking toward her. "Lily," he said when he reached her. His voice was calm but softer than before. "Please. Just hear me out." She sighed quietly and nodded toward a quieter corner of the hall, away from the crowd. They stood near a window, the city reflected behind them, both avoiding the other's gaze. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You have everything you ever wanted, Andrew. Why dig up what's gone?" He took a deep breath. "Because what's gone never really left me." Lily shook her head, her voice trembling. "You think showing up at a charity event changes anything? You left me when I needed you most. You left her before she even took her first breath." He didn't argue. "I know," he said simply. "And I can't undo that. But I need to make things right. I saw her, Lily. I saw her eyes. You can't expect me to pretend she doesn't exist." His words made her flinch, and for a moment, she looked away. "You don't get to just decide that now," she said quietly. "Mia has a life. A routine. She doesn't even know who you are." He hesitated before asking, "Have you told her?" Lily's silence was the answer. The music from the main hall drifted softly around them, and Andrew stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't want to take anything from you, Lily. I just want to be part of her life, even if it's just as someone she knows and trusts. You don't have to forgive me. But don't punish her for my mistakes." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "You think it's that easy?" she whispered. "You think you can just walk in and fix everything with good intentions?" He shook his head. "No. But I can try." And I'll keep trying until you believe me." She looked at him for a long time, as if searching for the man she once loved. For a second, something softened in her expression, but then she straightened her shoulders. "Good night, Andrew," she said quietly. "For her sake, I'll think about what's best. But that's all I can promise." She turned to leave, disappearing back into the crowd. Andrew stood there for a while, staring at the spot where she had been, the reflection of the city shimmering behind him. He didn't feel rejection, only determination. For years, he had fought for contracts worth millions, but this was the first time he was fighting for something priceless. That night, as he drove home through the quiet city streets, he realized he had already changed. The man who once measured his worth in power now wanted only to earn a small place in the life of the two people who mattered most. He didn't know how long it would take, or if Lily would ever trust him again, but for the first time in years, the future didn't scare him. It gave him hope. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Andrew, but this time, the rhythm of his days felt different. Work still demanded his attention, yet he found himself distracted, his thoughts always returning to that night at the gala, to Lily's trembling voice and the way she had looked at him before walking away. Her words had cut deep because they were true. He couldn't erase the past with apologies, but he could show her through action that he wasn't the same man anymore. Late one night, after everyone had left the office, he sat alone at his desk with the city stretching beneath him like a sea of light. The noise of success felt distant now, almost meaningless compared to the quiet sound of Mia's laughter that still echoed in his mind. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar contracts, and shaped industries, yet he had never learned how to say, "I'm sorry," and make it mean something. That was what haunted him most. He began learning about Lily's life, not by intrusion, but by small, respectful steps. He discovered that she worked at the Art Foundation full-time, organizing community programs for children and single mothers. It wasn't glamorous, and it barely paid enough to cover rent in the modest neighborhood she lived in, but it was meaningful. She had built a life based on compassion and purpose, something far deeper than anything he had ever done. He found out about the art classes she coordinated on weekends, and one Saturday, he drove to the community center, parking across the street. Through the wide windows, he saw her surrounded by children, her sleeves rolled up, her laughter soft and genuine. She was helping a little girl mix paint, her hands stained with color, and for a moment, he couldn't look away. She seemed so at peace there, so free of the ambition and greed that had once defined both their worlds. He felt like an intruder in a life that had moved on without him. When she noticed him standing outside, her expression froze, but instead of sending him away, she finished with the children and came out to speak to him. "You're persistent," she said, not angrily, but with weary acceptance. "I told you I'd think about it." He smiled faintly. "And I told you I wouldn't stop trying." Her gaze softened just slightly. "You can't keep showing up like this, Andrew. It's confusing, for me, for her." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I want to help. Not with money, not in a way that makes you feel small. I just want to be part of something real. Tell me what this place needs." She studied him for a long moment, perhaps expecting arrogance or a hidden motive, but his sincerity disarmed her. "We need supplies for the kids," she said finally, crossing her arms. "Paint, brushes, paper, clay, everything. But that's not your problem." He smiled, not pushing. "Maybe it is." He left without another word, but 2 days later, a delivery truck arrived at the center, dropping off boxes of art materials, books, and new furniture. The volunteers were stunned, and when Lily found out who had sent them, she didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. She called him that evening, her voice tight. "I told you not to do this," she said. "You think you can fix things with money, but that's not how this works." Andrew leaned back in his chair, listening to the edge in her tone. "I didn't do it to fix anything," he replied quietly. "I did it because those kids deserve better, and because you deserve support. That's all." There was silence on the other end before she sighed softly. "You're not making this easy." "Good," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Because I don't plan to." Over the next few weeks, they began to cross paths more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. At first, their conversations were brief and cautious, but slowly, the distance between them began to fade. She started to see the cracks in his polished exterior, the way his voice softened when he asked about her work, the small moments when his exhaustion showed through his control. And he saw the strength she had gained in his absence, the quiet resilience that came from surviving heartbreak and finding purpose beyond it. One afternoon, as the art class ended, Mia ran up to him with a paintbrush in her hand, laughing. "Look, Mommy, I painted a castle," she said proudly, showing him the paper smeared with blue and gold. Lily froze, but Andrew crouched down to admire it. "It's beautiful," he said gently, his voice thick with emotion. "You're very talented, Mia." She grinned, her eyes bright, and for the first time, Lily didn't stop her from talking to him. That night, Lily sat awake long after Mia had gone to bed, staring at the small drawing her daughter had given her, a picture of a castle with 3 figures standing in front of it, holding hands. She recognized herself and Mia instantly, but the third figure, a tall man with brown hair and blue eyes, made her heart ache. Children saw things adults were too afraid to admit. She realized then that no matter how hard she tried to protect Mia from disappointment, the girl's heart already sensed the truth: she wanted a father. The next morning, Lily called Andrew. "She asked about you," she said simply. "I told her you were an old friend." There was a pause on the line before he spoke, his voice quiet but filled with something raw. "Thank you." She took a deep breath. "If we do this, if you see her, it has to be on my terms. Slowly. Carefully. I won't let her get hurt." He agreed without hesitation. "Whatever you need. I'll follow your lead." When she hung up, she sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window as the morning sun filtered through the curtains. For the first time in years, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close. Something like hope. Meanwhile, Andrew couldn't shake the feeling that his life was finally beginning to move toward something real. For so long, he had been afraid of connection, of vulnerability, of losing control. But now, he realized that control had cost him everything that mattered. For the first time since he could remember, he was looking forward to something not tied to profit or ambition. The thought of seeing his daughter again filled him with both terror and joy. He knew it wouldn't be easy, he had years of absence to make up for, and the woman he loved no longer trusted him, but he also knew he wouldn't walk away again. That night, as he stood by his window, he whispered to himself, "This time, I'll stay." The first time Andrew saw Mia again up close, truly saw her, it was as if the world had slowed down around them. Lily had agreed to let him visit the art center on a quiet Saturday afternoon when the children's classes were smaller and less chaotic. He arrived early, sitting in his car for almost 10 minutes before getting out, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't nervous before business meetings or negotiations with billion-dollar stakes, but this was different. This was something he couldn't control, something that required more than strategy, it required heart. When he finally stepped inside, Lily was waiting for him, her posture straight, her expression calm but cautious. There was a certain fragility in the air, like a truce neither of them fully trusted yet. Mia was across the room, coloring at a small table, humming softly to herself. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with recognition. "Hi," she said cheerfully, waving her crayon-stained hand. "You came back." Andrew's throat tightened, and he could only nod, managing a small smile. "I did. I said I would." Lily watched the exchange quietly, her arms crossed, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of emotion that passed through her eyes at her daughter's joy. Mia gestured for him to sit next to her. "I'm drawing our castle again," she explained. "But this time it's bigger." He crouched beside her, careful not to intrude on her space, watching as she sketched 3 figures again, 2 smaller ones and a taller one between them. His heart clenched at the sight. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Can I help?" She nodded seriously and handed him a blue crayon. "You can color the sky. It has to be bright. Mommy says blue skies mean good days." As he filled in the paper with soft strokes, he could feel Lily's gaze on him. For a moment, everything felt strangely natural, as if they had always belonged in the same space but had somehow lost years wandering apart. Mia chattered endlessly, asking him small questions about everything: what his favorite color was, whether he liked ice cream, and if he knew how to draw butterflies. Each question broke a layer of distance that had built between them, and though he answered clumsily at first, soon he was laughing, something he hadn't done freely in years. When Lily finally spoke, it was to remind Mia that class was ending. "Say goodbye," she said gently. But Mia frowned. "Can he come again?" she asked, turning to her mother. Lily hesitated, glancing at Andrew before replying, "Maybe." That one word, "maybe," was enough to give him hope. Over the following weeks, Andrew began visiting more often, always with Lily's permission, always on her terms. At first, it was just at the art center, where he helped the children with crafts or read them short stories. But eventually, Lily allowed him to join them for small things: an afternoon at the park, a picnic near the fountain, even a trip to the bookstore where Mia proudly chose her first picture book, For Daddy's Friend. Every time, Andrew made sure to follow Lily's lead, never overstepping, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Slowly, the walls between them began to crack, not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Lily started to notice things she hadn't expected to see in him. The way he carried Mia on his shoulders, patient and gentle, laughing at her endless questions, the way he looked at her with quiet awe as if every small thing she did was a miracle. He wasn't the same man who had once turned away when she needed him. There was humility in him now, a kind of sincerity that came only from loss. Yet she still kept her distance, afraid to trust what she saw. One evening, after walking home from the park, Mia fell asleep in Andrew's car, her head resting on his arm. Lily stood outside the building, watching him carry their daughter carefully to her apartment door, afraid to break the fragile peace between them. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly when she opened the door. "I know I don't," she replied, but her voice softened. "Still, thank you." Inside her apartment later that night, Lily stood over Mia's bed, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. She realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. The girl who once only drew castles with 2 people now always drew 3. It scared her, how quickly Mia had attached herself to Andrew, but it also filled her with something she didn't want to name yet: a fragile, dangerous hope. She sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at her phone, wondering whether she should text him. She didn't, but the thought stayed with her, and that was enough to keep her awake until dawn. Meanwhile, Andrew's life began to shift in ways that surprised even him. His employees noticed the change first. He was less distant, more patient, even warm at times. The boardroom didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a place he could lead from integrity instead of pride. He began making time for things he once dismissed, leaving the office early to attend one of Mia's small art showcases, visiting the foundation not as a benefactor but as a volunteer. People started whispering that the ruthless CEO had grown a heart, and though Andrew didn't care what anyone said, he couldn't deny that they were right. One rainy afternoon, as he stood by the window in his office, he thought about how his life had come full circle. The man who once thought love was a weakness had learned that it was the only thing that made him strong. He thought of Lily, her steady strength, her quiet defiance, her laughter that used to fill every corner of his mind. He still didn't know if she could ever forgive him, but now, that didn't stop him. What mattered was being there, even if it was only from the sidelines. A week later, Lily surprised him with an invitation. It was to Mia's small dance recital at her preschool. The message was short, just a time, date, and a note saying, "She asked if you could come." He stared at it for a long moment, his chest tightening. He didn't realize until that moment that this was what redemption looked like, not grand forgiveness, not a dramatic reunion, but small steps toward being trusted again. When the day came, he sat quietly in the back row, watching his daughter twirl awkwardly in a pink tutu under the stage lights, her laughter filling the room. At one point, she spotted him in the crowd and waved proudly. He waved back, his vision blurring slightly as he smiled. When it was over, Mia ran straight to him, her shoes clicking on the floor. "Did you see me?" she asked breathlessly. "You were amazing," he whispered, hugging her tightly. Lily stood nearby, watching them with tears in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something new, something fragile and real. And for the first time in years, Andrew felt like he was home. After the recital, everything between them began to shift in ways neither Lily nor Andrew could fully explain. It wasn't sudden, nor was it smooth, it was quiet, like the slow melting of ice after a long winter. They started seeing each other more often, always under the pretext of something related to Mia: school meetings, small weekend outings, birthdays for the children at the Art Foundation, but there was something unspoken beneath it all, something fragile that neither dared to name. Andrew had learned to be careful with every word, every gesture. He no longer spoke with the confidence of a man used to getting his way. Instead, he spoke softly, like someone afraid to wake a sleeping memory. Lily, on the other hand, kept her walls high, but she found herself lowering them piece by piece without meaning to. She had spent years building a life on her own, and now the presence of the man who had once broken her heart felt both dangerous and comforting. One Sunday morning, he came by to pick up Mia for the day. It was supposed to be just the two of them, a visit to the zoo, ice cream afterward, the kind of simple outing most fathers took for granted. But when Lily opened the door, she was wearing an old blue sweater and her hair was still damp from the shower, and for a moment, they both just stared at each other, unsure of what to say. "You can come too, if you want," he said finally, his voice hesitant. "It's supposed to be a family day event, and I think she'd like that." She looked at him, uncertain. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, but before she could close the door, Mia came running, holding a small stuffed bear. "Please, Mommy. Come with us." The way she looked up at both of them, hopeful, innocent, made it impossible to refuse. So she went. The day turned out to be better than any of them expected. They walked through the zoo together, laughing as Mia pointed excitedly at every animal she saw, her hand slipping easily into both of theirs. For a few hours, it almost felt like they were a family, not broken, not haunted, just whole. Andrew watched them both with a kind of quiet reverence. He couldn't help but think about what he had thrown away all those years ago and how incredible it was that he'd been given even a glimpse of it again. When they stopped by the fountain near the exit, Mia tossed a coin into the water and closed her eyes tightly. "What did you wish for?" Andrew asked gently. She smiled. "I can't tell you, or it won't come true." But then she looked between them and whispered, "I think you already know." Lily felt something tighten in her chest, and when she met Andrew's eyes, she saw the same emotion mirrored there. Neither spoke, but everything that needed to be said was in that look. That evening, after Andrew dropped them off, he lingered in the car for a moment, watching as Lily carried Mia inside. For a brief second, the door opened again, and Lily looked back at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For today." He nodded, his voice catching slightly. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." The next few days, they exchanged small texts, nothing romantic, nothing emotional, just simple messages about Mia's school or the weather. But beneath each message, there was a current of warmth that neither could ignore. It was as if the years of silence between them were slowly being rewritten with something softer, something fragile but real. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. There was a knock on Andrew's door just after midnight. When he opened it, Lily was standing there, pale and shaken, clutching her phone. "Mia's sick," she said breathlessly. "She's burning up." I didn't know who else to call. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and followed her back to the apartment. They drove to the hospital together in silence, Lily holding Mia in her arms as Andrew sped through the nearly empty streets. At the emergency room, the doctors took her in immediately, and the two of them sat side by side in the waiting area, the cold fluorescent lights casting long shadows on their faces. Lily's hands were trembling, and Andrew reached out, gently taking one in his. "She'll be okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it for her or for himself. She didn't pull away. Hours passed before the doctor returned, explaining that it was just a severe flu, that she would be fine with rest and medication. The relief was so overwhelming that Lily let out a small, choked laugh and buried her face in her hands. Andrew exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging for the first time that night. When they went in to see Mia, she was sleeping peacefully, her small hand resting outside the blanket. Lily sat beside her, brushing her hair back tenderly, and Andrew stood behind her, watching them with an expression that was equal parts guilt and awe. "You've done so much for her," he said quietly. "More than I ever could have." Lily shook her head, still staring at her daughter. "You could have," she whispered, "if you'd chosen differently back then." Her words hung in the air, heavy but not cruel. He moved closer, his voice breaking. "If I could go back, I'd choose you both. Every time." She looked up at him then, tears glistening in her eyes, but there was no anger in them anymore, only exhaustion and a kind of weary understanding. "You can't change the past," she said softly. "But maybe you can help shape what comes next." He nodded, unable to speak. They stayed there until morning, side by side, barely talking, the space between them filled with years of things left unsaid. When the first light of dawn crept through the hospital windows, Mia stirred and opened her eyes. "Mommy?" "Daddy?" she murmured sleepily, her voice hoarse but calm. Lily froze, and for a moment, Andrew couldn't breathe. He glanced at Lily, unsure what to do, but she simply smiled faintly and brushed Mia's hair again. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart," she whispered. And as Mia drifted off again, Lily looked at him and said quietly, she said it herself. "Maybe it's time you start being that." For the first time in years, Andrew felt something deep inside him shift, a sense of belonging he had long thought he'd destroyed forever. That morning, as they walked out of the hospital together, the world looked different. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for once, the future didn't feel like something to be feared. It felt like something to fight for. The days following Mia's hospital stay felt quieter, softer, as if some invisible storm that had been raging between them had finally begun to calm. Lily and Andrew found themselves speaking more easily, no longer walking on the sharp edge of their shared history. He called often to check on Mia, but it wasn't just about updates anymore. Sometimes he called simply to hear Lily's voice, to ask how her day had been, to share a small story about something that reminded him of her. There was warmth in those calls, a careful tenderness that neither wanted to admit had begun to grow. Lily, for her part, still tried to remind herself to be cautious. She had promised herself years ago never to let him break her heart again, but every time she saw him with their daughter, every time she caught the gentleness in his eyes, that promise began to feel harder to keep. One afternoon, a few weeks later, he stopped by their apartment with takeout from Lily's favorite cafe. He said it was for Mia, who had asked for the mac and cheese from the place with the blue chairs, but Lily knew it was also his excuse to see them. When she opened the door, he stood there with a paper bag in one hand and a small bouquet of white daisies in the other. "These are for you," he said quietly. "Not to say sorry, just because I thought you'd like them." She hesitated, looking at him, then took the flowers. "Thank you," she said softly, and for the first time, she didn't sound guarded. Inside, Mia ran into his arms the second she saw him, chattering about her toys and school and how she'd drawn a picture of him and Mommy together. Lily flushed as she showed him the crayon drawing taped to the fridge, a house, a tree, and 3 smiling figures holding hands. "She has an imagination," Lily said quickly, trying to sound light, but Andrew only smiled. "Maybe she sees something we don't yet." They ate dinner together that evening, laughter mingling with the soft hum of the city outside. It was simple: plastic containers, paper napkins, Mia's giggles as she tried to make noodles dance on her fork, but it felt like the kind of peace Andrew hadn't known he'd been missing all his life. After Mia went to bed, Lily offered him coffee, and they sat by the window as the night settled around them. The conversation drifted from light topics to heavier ones, and eventually to the one they'd both avoided for years. "You really hurt me, Andrew," she said quietly, her fingers wrapped around her mug. "You made me believe I wasn't enough. That she wasn't enough." He stared at the floor, guilt pressing hard against his chest. "I know," he said. "And I'll never forgive myself for it. I thought I was protecting myself, but all I did was destroy everything that mattered." She sighed, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I spent so long being angry," she admitted. "I thought if I hated you, it would make it easier. But it didn't. It just made me tired." He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw the man he had become, not the arrogant, untouchable CEO who once thought he could control everything, but someone humbled, someone human. "I can't ask you to love me again," he said softly. "But I hope someday you'll let me prove that I can be better, for her, for you, for us." The honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. For a long moment, she said nothing, just looked out the window at the city lights flickering in the distance. "You already started," she said finally, almost in a whisper. From that night on, something unspoken began to shift between them. They didn't talk about getting back together, didn't label what was happening, but there was a quiet comfort in the way they existed around each other. Andrew became part of their daily lives in small ways, helping Mia with her school projects, fixing things around the apartment, sometimes cooking dinner when Lily worked late. He had always been decisive and commanding in business, but around Lily and Mia, he was patient, careful, almost gentle to a fault. Lily noticed the way he changed, how he listened now instead of talking, how he paid attention to small things like how she took her coffee or when she looked tired. Slowly, the years of distance began to dissolve. One weekend, Lily invited him to join them on a trip to the countryside for Mia's school picnic. The drive was long and quiet at first, but Mia filled the silence with endless chatter about her friends and the games they'd play. When they arrived, the wide fields and blooming trees felt like a different world from the noise of the city. Andrew helped set up their blanket under a tree, and for the rest of the day, he was just another father among families, laughing, running, playing. At one point, Lily stood back and watched him chase Mia across the grass, her laughter ringing like music. For the first time in years, she saw what could have been if things had been different, and it made her heart ache in the most unexpected way. As the sun began to set, they sat together while Mia slept curled up between them on the blanket. The golden light softened everything, and in that moment, Lily felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: peace. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to imagine moments like this when I was pregnant. You being here. Us together. I used to hate myself for still wanting it." He turned to her slowly, his voice low. "You don't have to hate yourself for that. You were right to want it. I just wasn't ready to deserve it then." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "And now?" He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his touch tentative, almost reverent. "Now I wake up every day trying to be the man who deserves you both. Even if I never get to have you, I'll spend the rest of my life being someone you can be proud of." Lily's breath caught at his words. She didn't answer, not right away, but when he moved his hand away, she caught it gently, holding it for a moment before letting go. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was something close. When they drove back that evening, Mia slept in the back seat, the radio playing softly. Lily leaned her head against the window, watching the blur of lights outside, and thought about how far they had come from the night he walked away. For the first time, the idea of a future with him didn't terrify her. It didn't even hurt anymore. It simply felt possible. Andrew glanced at her in the rearview mirror, and when their eyes met, neither of them looked away. They didn't need words anymore, everything that mattered was already there, in the silence between them. The road stretched ahead, endless and full of promise, and for the first time in years, both of them felt like they were finally moving towards something that could last. Months passed, and the rhythm of their lives slowly settled into something that neither Lily nor Andrew had expected but both quietly cherished. What had once been tense and uncertain now carried the kind of calm that came from acceptance. The pain between them hadn't disappeared, it still lingered like a scar, but it had faded into something that no longer ruled them. Andrew had become a constant presence, not only in Mia's life but in Lily's as well. He no longer tried to impress her with grand gestures or promises of luxury, instead, he showed up with small, genuine acts of care. He would drop by with breakfast when she had an early meeting, fix a squeaky door hinge without being asked, or leave flowers on her porch without a note. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was love, the kind that didn't demand to be acknowledged, only given. One evening, Lily invited him to dinner at her apartment, something she hadn't done since the night they shared coffee months ago. It was a simple meal: pasta, salad, and a bottle of red wine she'd been saving since her last birthday. Mia was at a sleepover, and for the first time in a long time, they were alone without the buffer of their daughter's laughter. The air between them was different now, softer but charged with a quiet anticipation. They talked easily at first, about work and Mia's latest obsession with painting, but slowly the conversation turned inward. "You've changed," Lily said, studying him as she swirled her wine. "You listen now. You laugh more. You seem lighter." Andrew smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "I guess I stopped running from the things that matter. I spent years chasing everything that didn't." She looked down, tracing the rim of her glass with her finger. "I used to think you didn't have a heart," she said softly. "Now I see you were just afraid to use it." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I was terrified," he admitted. "Of love, of commitment, of losing control. But the truth is, I lost so much more by letting fear decide for me. You and Mia, you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. A reason to stop pretending." Lily didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she turned it over, her fingers brushing against his. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, alive with the weight of everything they'd been through and everything that still lay unspoken between them. After dinner, they moved to the balcony, where the city lights stretched endlessly beneath them. The night air was cool, and Lily wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Andrew stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. For a while, they didn't speak, just stood together watching the world below. Finally, she said quietly, "Do you ever wish we could go back?" He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "No," he said after a moment. "Because if we went back, I'd probably make the same mistakes again. I wasn't ready then. But now I know what I almost lost." She smiled sadly. "You did lose it." He nodded. "And maybe that's what it took for me to understand what love really is. It's not possession. It's forgiveness. It's staying even when you have every reason to leave." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the man who had once shattered her, but the one who had spent years trying to piece together what he'd broken. Something inside her gave way. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened," she whispered. "But I think I'm ready to stop letting it define us." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture that was both tender and reverent. "I don't need you to forget," he said softly. "I just need you to let me love you now, in whatever way you'll let me." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. Instead, she felt light, free, as if she could finally breathe. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet transformation. They didn't rush into declarations or promises. There were still boundaries, still moments of hesitation, but love had begun to weave itself through their lives again, slowly and carefully. Andrew started spending weekends with them, sometimes cooking breakfast while Mia sat on the counter, giggling as she helped stir pancake batter. Lily would watch them from the doorway, her heart swelling with a kind of peace she hadn't thought possible. One Sunday morning, as the smell of coffee filled the kitchen, Mia looked up at Andrew and said, "Mommy smiles more now. You make her smile." Andrew froze for a moment, then laughed softly, lifting her into his arms. "She's the one who taught me how," he said, and Lily, standing behind him, felt tears prick her eyes. It was months later, on a warm summer evening, that everything came full circle. Andrew had invited them both to a small charity gala his company was hosting, not as a gesture of showmanship, but because he wanted them to be part of the world he had once shut them out of. Lily had hesitated, but eventually agreed. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and when Andrew saw her step out of the car, he felt something in his chest tighten with awe. All evening, he couldn't take his eyes off her, not out of possession, but pure gratitude. When the event ended, he took her hand and led her to the rooftop garden above the venue, away from the noise and lights. The city stretched around them in silence. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I know this, whatever it is, I want to face it with you and her. Not because I owe you, not because I need redemption, but because I love you." I never stopped. Lily looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. For a moment, she said nothing, just stepped closer and rested her head against his chest. "Then stop saying sorry," she whispered. "Just stay." He wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if letting go would mean losing everything again. And in that moment, it wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about beginning again, on new ground built from honesty and love. Mia burst onto the rooftop a few minutes later, running toward them with her shoes in her hands, laughing breathlessly. "Mommy, Daddy, look! The stars," she exclaimed, pointing at the sky. They both turned, following her gaze. The stars shimmered faintly above the city, scattered and fragile but beautiful, just like the family they had become. Andrew lifted Mia into his arms, and Lily stood beside him, her hand finding his without hesitation. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The past had finally loosened its grip, and the future stretched wide open before them, bright, uncertain, and full of promise. For the first time in years, Andrew knew he had everything he would ever need right there beside him.